Hello interwebs, and welcome to my review of a video game that I was incredibly excited to finally get to play, Tell Me Why. And sadly, no, Tell Me Why is not an early 2000s boy band simulator game. Tell me why I don't remember the lyrics to this song. I don't know why I don't stop singing, but I want it that way. I don't remember my early 2000s boy band songs all that well, if you can't tell. But in all seriousness, Tell Me Why was a video game that I was really looking forward to from the moment that I first heard it was announced. The first reason is because it's from developer DONTNOD, who is the creator of two of my favorite games of all time, Life is Strange and Life is Strange 2. Now, while Life is Strange and Life is Strange 2 were far from perfect games, they were incredibly well done stories, at least in my opinion. Again, there's some issues here and there with that. Senses of Place had this very Twin Peaksy vibe, were really great explorations of towns and the cast of characters in towns, and also, especially in the case of Life is Strange and Life is Strange 2, were really good representations of minority groups. You had the queer community represented in Life is Strange and a few other communities as well, and then Life is Strange 2 doubled down on that and told a really compelling story, one that you never get to see in video games, about the Hispanic community in the United States. It was just, DONTNOD is just a really great company at telling stories about groups that are very underrepresented in video games and making them feel very relatable, very prescient and pertinent, and doing it with like a sort of flavoring of, like I said, that Twin Peaksy, supernaturally kind of vibe going on throughout all of them. I mean, there's some superpowers and stuff like that. That had me all really excited for them to have a new game in a new universe that wasn't necessarily tied to the Life is Strange universe, but the thing that really got me pumped about this game was the fact that they announced that this game was going to feature one of the protagonists being a trans man. Yes, and the fact that this game was going to be published by Microsoft, one of the biggest video game publishers out there. I mean, they literally make Xbox. This was going to be one of the first, if only, games that I can think of that is a trans masculine feature game that is being published by a major publisher, and the fact that it was being handled by DONTNOD, who I already said is well versed in handling these types of topics of minority groups and representing minority groups pretty well, at least in my opinion. I'm not part of the Hispanic community, though I can speak for the queer community, and at least to a little bit of a degree, in saying that I think they handled it pretty well in Life is Strange. With all that in mind, I was just very pumped to see Tell Me Why. But how did the game actually do? Well, let's dive into my review, and I'm going to remain mostly spoiler-free for this review, but I will talk a little bit about spoilers as we get more into the nitty-gritty of this discussion. Tell Me Why is a 3-part adventure game series that focuses on the story of two twins, Tyler, a trans man, and Ashley, his twin sister. At the very beginning of the game, we learn that when they were young, Tyler's mom, right after he cut his hair because he, wanted to present more masculinely, his mom freaked out, chased him down with a gun, and attempted to kill him, and Tyler fought back, defending himself, killing his mother in return. So right off the bat, we're starting off with some trans trauma issues, but I'll sort of put a pin in that and we'll get back to it. But the story mainly focuses on 10 years later, where Tyler and Ashley finally meet after Tyler had spent the past decade living both in a juvenile help facility and then spending 3 years after that sort of like staying in that area to help out kids and sort of like figure out his life and what he wants to do, and also start his transition to becoming Tyler full-time. Tyler at the beginning of this game is living full-time as Tyler. He's been transitioning for a long time now and is finally coming back to Delos Crossing, where his sister and him lived as a kid, to finally sell the house that their mother died in and that they lived in as kids. So that's basically the impetus of the game, and you start to get into some mystery surrounding the town, as well as some mystery surrounding the mother and who their father might be, and also some possible supernatural stuff as well, because we learn that the twins, Tyler and Ashley, actually have a supernatural power that allows them to talk to each other in their heads because they're twins, as well as look back at the past and see visualizations of their memories. They can like look at something and see their memory visualized right in front of them. The first thing that I want to talk about with this game is how amazing the technical aspects of this video game is. With other DONTNOD games, they were kind of like Telltale adventure games and a lot of like lower budget adventure games of like last generation and this generation, in that there was a lot of bugs, there was a lot of problems, there was a lot of like sluggishness. The graphics looked pretty and stylized, but they weren't anything to write home about. But that really changes here with Tell Me Why. You can definitely tell they're getting that Microsoft money, if you know what I mean, because this game just beautifully evokes Alaska. The visuals, the like looking out over the Alaskan wilderness, the town places in the town that you get to visit and the people in the town that you get to visit, all make you feel like you're really visiting an Alaskan town. They just did a brilliant job in the art direction. I want to give particular praise to the sound design. Throughout this entire game, I was actually playing with headphones, and there were many times that I literally just had to stop the game and stare out over the Alaskan tundra and just listen to the sounds of Alaska. I felt so in that place, so much so that there were some moments where you're playing the game and planes fly overhead in the distance, and I literally had to take off my headphones to be like, is there a plane flying above me? It's so completely just put me in this universe, and I would really recommend playing this game with headphones. And honestly, I have to be very, very honest with you, as someone who is living in Los Angeles right now and was going through one of the worst heat waves really ever in America, to escape to Alaska in such a full and completely realized way was honestly a real boon to my mental health. So just on that level, on just the technical aspects, this game did fantastically. But all of that is in service to really getting you to feel like you are in this Alaskan town. And just like every other Don't Nod game before this, they do a really great job of making Delos Crossing, this Alaskan town, really feel real and vibrant and full of people that you would get to experience in this world. It feels like a very small town feel, where everyone knows the police chief, everyone knows the people who run the store. There's the guy who's running for like the town mayor of this small little town. You have the very religious woman. You have people that you kind of meet as you walk around the town. You have people who work in the grocery store, which, by the way, Michael, who is the best friend of Allison in this game. Michael, sweetest human being I've ever known. I do have some problems with the actual story of this game, but in terms of just the lived-in feel and just talking to these people around Delos Crossing, they really honestly nail it. Life is Strange 1 got a lot of flack at it because it was like, you know, we're hella cool, like trying to evoke teenager slang without actually really nailing how teenagers talk. But as someone who's never visited Alaska but has lived in small, like, rural towns, kind of like this town, it definitely just feels like they nailed how all of these characters were written. And I want to give one particular praise to a scene later on in the game where Tyler and Michael go ice fishing. It's one of the most beautiful scenes between two characters that just felt like a real, just a very real conversation.
Look, I stopped listening to the entire indie folk genre just because I was dumped at a show once. But I put myself back out there just like everyone who's ever gotten their heart stomped on. Because when you meet someone who really sees you, you don't have to pretend anymore.
Really made me cry. It was so heartwarming and beautiful, and I can't praise the writers of this game on that level for how well they evoke this town and the people within this town. On that note too, I want to talk about what probably most of you are interested in my opinion for, is the trans representation of Tyler in this game. Like I said, I'll talk about the trans trauma bit in just a second, but I think in terms of just the lived-in feel of Tyler as a trans masculine character, the game does so well. I do not think I have ever seen a trans representation in video games, and possibly any media ever, that really evokes the feeling of being a transgender person of my generation. Tyler's a little bit younger than me. I think he's like in 23, 24, and I'm 28. I honestly felt like this game just nailed trans people of around my age and my generation. They nail some of the awkward, weird jokes that trans people make. Like, Tyler is so very much me, despite the fact that he's a trans man and not a trans woman. Like, he literally makes jokes like when someone offers him coffee or tea, he says, well, I'm more of a tea person, if you know what I mean. That's like the dumbest, lowest base level pun humor that trans people make. And again, the game just does that so many times repeatedly. It feels very naturalistic, and it feels like this game just honestly just spot on nails how Tyler would present as a trans man, that he, you know, wouldn't be subtle about it. I mean, everyone kind of knows that he's a trans person, so he makes jokes about it. He has issues about it, but he also brings it up naturally sometimes when he talks about binders and wanting to get top surgery.
Didn't think a picture could throw me like this anymore.
I'm sorry. That sounds really rough.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm like 1,000 times better, but I've got a ways to go before I'm comfortable taking my shirt off, which is why I'm scheduling my top surgery as soon as we sell this house.
but it's never like, hey everybody, look at me, I'm trans, isn't that like my defining feature as a character? No, Tyler has other things going on, but it does come up naturally and realistically in jokes and just casual conversation when it's necessary, as it does for many trans people of my generation who are out trans people. I also really loved speaking to how the town is written, how people are evoked, how people treat Tyler throughout the game. There were just people that sometimes just took Tyler being trans as no big deal or didn't know that he was trans, especially people of his age, like Michael, the aforementioned character who I really love, just doesn't really talk about Tyler being trans and treats him like a man. But there are other characters in the game who are a little bit awkward, a little bit off. They sometimes react a little bit negatively, like some Christian-related folks that they're not mean or cruel, but they're a little like, I don't know how I feel. One of the moments that I really, really loved is there's a character in the game who you meet, Uncle Eddie, who is a cop in the game, who is basically the pseudo father figure for Allison after their mother's death. He like overemphasizes saying dude and my man during his first initial meeting with Tyler, which is something that I see all the time. Whenever I first meet people who want to be affirming of me being trans, they do this adorable thing where they say like, hey girl, how you doing, my woman, like things like that. Like they overemphasize gender terms to say like, hey, I totally get you and I support you. It's honestly very sweet and honestly very adorable, and it totally does happen all the time. Or people like always bring up the political aspects of being trans, like, so you're changing terms all the time.
You know, I'm just trying to be me. It's just who I am.
Well, I've seen a couple of lady transvestites on the TV before, but I've never seen a dude.
Sam, that's not how you say that.
Say what? Transvestites?
Yes. It's transgender. Transgender men.
I'm sorry. It's hard to keep track out here in Delos Crossing. The world's just moving on without us.
It's fine. Let's just change the subject.
Works for me. Tyler.
Thanks, Sam.
And Tyler always takes these really well. He gets angry or frustrated, as I would get angry or frustrated in those situations, and sometimes he just lets it roll off his chest. And again, just brilliantly written depiction of trans characters in this game. Also, it should be said, I can't really speak for this community, but I do really love that there were a lot of indigenous characters in this game. It's not very often we get to see indigenous people in video games just sort of like living daily lives as like a police officer or, working at a grocery store. Many of the times when we see indigenous characters, it's really, again, them being represented as indigenous, or even worse, where we have indigenous culture evoked, but not actually having indigenous actors or characters within the game itself. That just happens so often in video games. So again, I can't really speak for that community, but I do like that we got to see some very naturalistic indigenous representation in this game. I also really loved the relationship between Tyler and Allison in this game. That really felt like these were characters who really loved each other, really had bonded as kids, and you really get this beautiful sense of their relationship through flashbacks and how that's kind of changed as they've grown up, and how Tyler's become much more of an isolationist person, and Allison is really not dealt with the trauma of the situation of around their mother's death, and you're sort of seeing that pulling them apart versus how close they used to be when they finally come back together. And this gets us into gameplay. A lot of this gameplay is built around either solving puzzles or making choices, as you do in many adventure games, like choices that affect the different outcomes of the story. The puzzles that you have to solve for this game are a lot of fun. They quite often revolve around this fairy tale book that Tyler and Allison wrote when they were kids, so you have to like read these sort of fairy book stories to try and figure out some of the puzzles in the present day. And so I thought that they were very clever and very well done and very well paced throughout the game. And then the game also revolves around a lot of choices that you make, like I said, where you have to like choose this thing or the other thing. And a lot of the choices in this game are not sort of bigger, high moment sort of things, but smaller scale choices that really are about showing whether or not you are understanding how to bring Allison and Tyler back together as a family unit. Because a lot of the choices are about will you do something that sort of pushes them apart or brings them together. And I really kind of liked that sort of lower stakes feel for a lot of the choices in this game, that it really wasn't about sort of the bigger things going on, but it was about between these two characters. But that does kind of bring me into some of my major issues with this gameplay and this story. Again, not to spoil too much about the game, but a lot of the main plotline story of this game felt incredibly low stakes. While I did like the fact that a lot of the choices and stories that you had to pick in this game were about the relationship between the two characters, a lot of it felt like I wasn't really stressed out or worried about it. Yes, I cared about these two characters because they were so well written and evoked, but there was very few times throughout the game where I was very like, oh, on the edge of my seat, like, what do I need to pick? Is this the really weighty or meaty choice? Do I really need to pick this thing over this thing? In other adventure games like Life is Strange or the Telltale games, there were many moments, some of them forced and some of them meaningless, but really had me on the edge of my seat. And this game never really did that. And I'm not saying it had to be like these big moments of like, do you save this person or do you save this person? But even the personal stakes stuff, while I liked that it was lower stakes, didn't really feel like it was super stressful for me to decide until we got to the latter half of the game. And it ultimately left a lot of the present day story feeling not all that compelling. While I loved the sense of place and I loved the sense of character that we got throughout this game, much of the present day storyline really didn't intrigue me all that much. There was a few twists and turns throughout the game of like were these characters' father. Also, there was this character who was trying to hide the past from Tyler and Allison, trying to burn down their house and things like that. But ultimately, all the twists I kind of saw coming. There's even one twist at the very end of this game about who their father is that was honestly so obvious that even the characters themselves didn't seem all that surprised by the revelation. So it really all just felt kind of low stakes when it came to the present day storyline. That being said, the themes of Tell Me Why are really more rooted in trauma and memory, and how memory influences our trauma and how we have to reconcile with our past and our memories and who we were and make decisions about who we were in order to be able to move forward. Now, that theme is clearly evoked in the character of Tyler as a trans man, who is someone who had to reconcile his past as a trans person to try and move forward and to come to decisions on who he was as a person in order to be able to move forward. But we also get that same theme played out in the gameplay, as well as Tyler and Allison working to uncover their past and really what went down on the night of their mother's murder. Again, I don't want to spoil some of the twists here, but I really loved that this game really complexifies, if that's a word, a lot of the clear black and whiteness of the initial death of their mother. When we first hear about the mother, I was very bothered by the fact that this story was rooting itself in another trans trauma storyline, that their mother tried to kill Tyler over the fact that he was trans. But that story gets much more complex as the game continues forward. And you really start to see that there's a lot more shades of gray, not only to Tyler and Allison's past, but also to their mother's past. That she wasn't this like overbearing, terrible mother that she sort of postulated to be at the start of the game, but that she actually has a lot more trauma herself that she went through and that she wasn't really completely able to reconcile with because she just didn't want to deal with her own past. And so that sort of portrays and bounces off of characters like Allison, who, again, without spoiling too much, gets very wrapped up in this plot and very much has to deal with her PTSD coming out of this event, but has to be able to reconcile with her past in order to do that. So I really think that this game, in terms of how it handles the past story, really tied well into the themes, really was an important message to say about how we can only move forward and deal with our trauma if we really sort of reconcile with some of the events of our past and how we need to make decisions and how memory is very malleable. And that plays out in the gameplay. Again, I sort of said that the characters have this superpower where they can see memory events, but a lot of the time you can see these moments from two different perspectives. You can see it from Tyler's point of view or Ashley's point of view, and they have very differing remembrances of what happened, and you have to choose which memory that you want to remember, which one felt more real. And obviously there's ones that are more correct than others, but I really like this idea that time displaces memory. And it really starts to get into the theme of, again, you just need to come to terms with what your memory is in order to be able to move forward. And you just need to make choices, but you can't live in this gray area. You need to make solid choices about your past in order to go forward in your identity. So I think they did a really brilliant evocation of that theme through the gameplay and through the past storyline. I just wish that they had been able to marry that with a much more compelling and urgent present-day storyline, because a lot of this felt like, why do I really care about doing this all right now? There's a lot of this game is like, we need to solve these mysteries right now. We need to get forward. We need to get everything done right at this moment. But I never really felt like that urgency was anything real. I just felt like it was just something to get the characters moving, and I never really actually felt that they needed to do this in the present day outside of a few moments here and there. So that was really my major problem with this game. The other thing too is, like I touched upon, I was somewhat bothered by the fact that this game initially starts off as a trans trauma storyline. Again, that gets complicated and actually diffused as the game goes on, and it's not really all about trans trauma at all. In fact, most characters eventually come to terms with Tyler being trans, and they accept him for who he is, which I think is a really brilliant message and a great way to show representation in this game. I just wish it didn't have to be instigated by a trans trauma storyline. We see so many storylines where trans people go through a lot of trauma for being trans, and I wish it had just been kind of bypassed altogether. And I know that this game did want to deal with him being trans and take it naturalistically, which I appreciated, so it was really kind of weird that it was this heightened, over the top, like I literally murdered my mother because she was trying to kill me for being trans right at the start of this game. And it can be very off-putting and kind of leave a bad taste in your mouth right at the start, especially for people in the trans community who have seen this over and over and over again. And I almost wish they had found another way to handle that and deal with it, because it ultimately is somewhat inconsequential to the actual story that they want to tell. And so it's just a weird place to start if your ultimate goal is to sort of treat being trans as a very naturalistic thing. Yes, it coming up, and yes, it causing conflict, but not it being the main focus of Tyler as a character. So I was kind of bothered by that fact. But again, it does get better as the game goes along. It's just a little bit rough, especially for people who may have been traumatized for being trans. I know I played this game, the first episode of it, on Twitch, and I know a lot of people watching me play it on Twitch had to, bow out at a couple points because it could be very triggering, some of the things that were being talked about and shown on screen. And again, it ultimately felt kind of like it didn't need to be that way by the end of the game. All right, I know I've ranted a lot about Tell Me Why. It probably will mean that this video probably won't do super well in the algorithm, but I honestly had a lot of thoughts about this game, and I really wanted to sort of delve into it and get into the meat of it. But I will give it my full recommendation here, with a little bit of an asterisk on it that, yes, it does have a trans trauma storyline at the top. Yes, it's a present-day storyline, isn't as urgent as it could be, but generally, overall, I think it tells a really important story, a really compelling story, and does it in a location and with characters that we really don't ever get to see in video games. And for that, I think it's just a really unique and fun experience that I really wholeheartedly recommend, with a few reservations here and there. But if you've played Tell Me Why, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on it and down in the comments below. Or did I convince you to play Tell Me Why? I'd really love to hear all of your thoughts about this game, because I really want to hear a discussion going from the trans community on this game. Because I think it's a really great moment for representation of trans people and trans masculine representation as well, that we really don't get to see within really video games or any media ever. So I really want to hear all your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more discussions of trans representation in pop culture, LGBTQ representation in pop culture, and also just nerding out in general about Star Trek and science fiction and all that fun stuff. I also have some podcasts called What the Frell and Star Trek Behind the Lines, and I have a Patreon page where you can help support me in this endeavor here on YouTube and get yourself cool perks as well. But beyond all of that stuff, whether you subscribe or comment or help me out on Patreon, I'm just glad that you stopped by, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Clinard, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Jemshin, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, Wellington Marcus, John Steele, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Jason Knott, Maeve, Subraxis, Tonya Trummer, Wen Dizzle-Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, and Bree Beecher. Thank you all so much for your continued support.